This is part two of a series on solving quadratic equations in four ways. In this video, we are going to be solving the equation 0 equals 2x squared minus 5x plus 2 using solving by factoring, graphing, completing the square, and by the quadratic formula. We're going to start by factoring, and to note with factoring does not always work. It is the quickest method when you are good at factoring, and quick at factoring, the more you do it, the quicker you'll be. But again, it does not always work. So we're going to start by copying over our equation. 0 equals 2x squared minus 5x plus 2. My goal is to break this into two factors. And I know that I want this times this to be 2x squared. 2x squared, or 2 is prime, so our only options are 2x times x. And then I also want the two constants of our factors to multiply to get 2, while at the same time, this loop, so 2x times that number, and this number times x, we want these two loops to combine to negative 5x. Oops, sorry. Okay, so we are considering factors of 2. Luckily, 2 is prime, so it's either going to be 1 times 2 or negative 1 times negative 2. And we're definitely going to be choosing this bottom one because we have a negative 5x in the middle. We just need to decide which of these two orange highlights is going to be the negative 1 and which is going to be the negative 2. If I choose to do negative 2 here and negative 1 here, this top loop is going to be negative 2x. And the bottom loop is going to be negative 2x, and hopefully you can see that combines to negative 4x, and we want negative 5x, so we know that's wrong. So instead, I'm going to put minus 1 here and minus 2 here. When I do that, that top loop becomes negative 4x, the bottom loop becomes negative x, and those do combine to negative 5x. Now that I have my two factors, I'm going to use the zero product property. Which says that if two factors equal 0, then one of them is equal to 0. Okay, so for us, we're going to have 2x minus 1 equals 0, or x minus 2 equals 0. And we're going to solve both of these for x. On this first one, I'll add 1, and then I'll divide by 2, running out of space. And for my first solution, I get x equals 1/2. For the second one, I'll add 2, and I get x equals 2 for my other solution. Okay, the next method that we're going to use is graphing, and I would highly suggest using a TI-84 calculator, but if you do not, I'll kind of talk you through how to do it by hand. So I'm going to rewrite the equation. 0 equals 2x squared minus 5x plus 2, and I'm going to make a t-chart, and I'm kind of pretending that this 0 is a y equals and putting it there. To start, we're going to go from negative 2 to 2, and then see if we need to add more numbers. So we're going to be plugging in our x's into both of these places and writing down what we get for y. I'm going to go pretty quick because I'm using my calculator. So for negative 2, I plug in and I get 20. For negative 1, I get 9. For 0, I get 2. For 1, I get negative 1. For positive 2, I get 0. So let's go ahead and graph these and see what we have. So negative 2, 20 will be off the grid, but I can graph negative 1, 9, 0, 2, 1, negative 1, 2, 0. It looks super funky. So let's do maybe one or two more points after. So if I plug in 3 and 4, I get 3, 5, and 4, 14. So that's off the page, but I can graph 3, 5. Okay, so it's really hard to tell from this, but we know that one of our solutions is 2, 0, because up here we had plugged in a y instead of 0, so we're trying to find where y is 0, and I highlighted that point on the graph as well. And we know from factoring that our other 0 is going to come at x equals 1/2, so we can kind of, I guess, cheat and think this through. So we know we're going to have a 0 right there, and it's going to look something like this. So graphing is probably not the easiest method really ever, but for sure on this equation because from the table we couldn't see that 1/2. Okay. But now we knew that from factoring, we could use our TI-84 calculator. We could plug in a 1/2 into our equation on our table and we would get a 0 here. Okay, so from graphing, we get the same two solutions. X equals 1/2 or x equals 2. Wasn't as pretty as the equation that we did in part 1 because that 1/2 kind of makes it, yeah, a little off-centered. Okay, we're going to go on to completing the square. So I'm going to start by rewriting the equation. 0 equals 2x squared minus 5x plus 2. We're going to group off these first two terms. Some teachers will tell you to move the 2 to the other side to start. I'm just going to leave it for now. On the next line, I'm going to rewrite this with some space. So 0 equals, I'm going to keep these parentheses but add more space in them. So 2x squared minus 5x with a space, and then still have that plus 2 on the outside. Before we turn that pink parentheses into a square, we want to divide out that leading coefficient of 2. So I need to divide that 2x squared and negative 5x by 2. And when I do that, I have a 2 on the outside, and I'm left with x squared minus 5 over 2x with some space, and then I still have that plus 2 at the back. Now that I brought that 2 out, now I can go to my completing the square step. So this would be 0 equals 2, and we're trying to make this into a square. I'm going to go a little faster on this video than I did in part 1, but to get this blank right here, we need to divide 5 over 2 by 2. And when we do that, we get minus 5 over 4. Next, to go back and fill in that space, this is actual completing the square step, we're going to square 5 over 4. So this would be plus 25 over 16. We square the 5, we square the 4. Okay, so if we notice here, we still have a blank. And it's not just 25 over 16, it's 25 over 16 times this 2 that we had factored out. Because if you notice on this line right here, we have the 2 factored out, but this top line, we have it factored back in. So we need to factor it back in on the top. And to do that, we're going to multiply 25 over 16 times 2, and that will give us 25 over 8. Now, you can't just randomly add something to an equation. So to compensate for that, we're also going to subtract it at the back. So we're adding 25 over 8 randomly in the middle. You can't do that, so we need to subtract it as well. So I'm just going to bring that down to this step because we have that 2 written already. But right here, I'm going to, in my calculator, do 2 minus 25 over 8. And I get minus 9 over 8. So we have completed the square, and now we can solve for x by just using algebra. I'm going to move some of this up so I have some more space here. Okay, the first thing I'll do to solve for x is I'm going to add 9 over 8 to both sides. So I'll have 9 over 8 equals 2 times x minus 5/4 squared. Next, I'm going to divide by 2. When I do that, I get 9/16 is equal to x minus 5/4 squared. Next, to get rid of the squared, I'll square root both sides. And when I do that, I need to consider both plus or minus. The square root of 9 is 3. The square root of 16 is 4. I need to add 5/4 to both sides. When I do that, I get 5/4 plus or minus 3/4 is equal to x. And from here, I get my two solutions. One has the plus, one has the minus. So I have 5/4 plus 3/4 equals x. And I'll have 5/4, oops, minus 3/4 equals x. And when I simplify these, I get 8/4 equals x, or 2 equals x for my first solution. And for the second one, 5 minus 3 is 2/4 equals x, or if I simplify that, that would be 1/2 equals x. So we got the same thing, oops, by graphing and factoring that we did just now with completing the square. All right, the last method that we'll use is the quadratic formula. So let me go ahead and write that down before we start. It is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. We're going to bring down our equation. 0 equals 2x squared minus 5x plus 2. And we're going to label our a, b, and c. A is always the coefficient with x squared, b is the coefficient with x, and c is the constant. I like to do this underneath part first so that my work stays clean. This is called the discriminant. And so I'm going to be doing b squared minus 4ac first. And when I do that, this would be negative 5 squared minus 4 times 2 times 2. And I like to use my calculator when I do this part so that I don't make a math error. And I get 9. Okay, so now I'm highlighting this 9 in green because I'm going to substitute it where I highlighted in green on that quadratic formula. So now we have x equals negative b for us is going to be positive 5 plus or minus the square root. Here we got our square root, which would be 9. All over 2a was going to be 2 times 2. So this is all over 4. When I simplify this, I can do 5 plus or minus 3 instead of the square root of 9. And so very similar to when I was completing the square, I have 5 plus 3/4 as one of my solutions. And I have x equals 5 minus 3/4 as my other solution. So separating the plus and the minus. So when I reduce this, I get x over 4, or sorry, 8/4. So my first solution is 2. And when I simplify this one, I get 2/4. So my second solution is 1/2. Great. So we solved the equation 0 equals 2x squared minus 5x plus 2 using 4 different methods, and we ended up with the same two solutions in all 4 methods, x equals 2 and x equals 1/2.